Today, we are going to have a discussion about the Asia Center report on media freedom in Southeast Asia. Together with us, we are having Dr. James Gomez, the Regional Director of Asia Centers. Dr. James, thank you very much for having us today.
Yeah, and happy to be here though.
So, how are you doing, sir?
I'm very good. There are a lot of media developments every day, and new media is shutting down. So when they shut down, it also has an impact on media freedoms. So I'm very happy to be here to discuss Asia Center's report on media freedoms in Southeast Asia.
Well, that's very good to hear, sir. Let's jump into the interview sections. So, according to the 2021 Global Press Free Index of Reporters Without Borders, which is also mentioned in the Asia Center report, stated that all the ASEAN countries, except Timor-Leste, is rated below 100 in the index. Can you tell me the factor contributing to the low index of the ASEAN countries?
Okay, that's a good question. Essentially, there are two big reasons. The first reason is really law. Southeast Asia has one of the most strictest laws governing media freedom because many of the countries in the region are either one-party states, monarchies, military junta, or the level of political competition is fairly low and problematic. As a result, the elite in power always need a communication vehicle to put forward their propaganda and socialization. And they've always, used mainstream media. Now, either governments owned it, the military owns it, or perhaps political parties own it. It is not a competitive state of media freedoms. So because these rules are so strict, if any media or journalist goes out of line, these laws can be used, first of all, to punish journalists individually, or also use it to remove the licenses of media companies or institutions and close them down. So that is the first big reason. The second big reason is really finance and the business model. Many independent media are struggling. They can't stay open simply because of the business model where consumers don't really want to pay for content. So because if they cannot generate a revenue for their content, then they will not have enough sustenance to keep the media project going. So this, in fact, to me, is a bigger reason why there is not enough alternative and independent media. And because we do not have, alternative and independent media, our media freedoms are small. But you did mention in the start the statistics of how ASEAN countries generally are poor in their ranking, whereas Timor is doing well. I always joke with Timorese friends, including, senior people in the Timorese government, that if they join ASEAN, there's a big risk that their freedom index will actually drop because they will have to adopt some of the practices and measures as part of their ASEAN membership. So I'll leave it there and back to you.
So, in terms of controlling the media freedom in Southeast Asia, what is the role of legislation?
Yeah, so the laws operate on two levels. So first of all, we have already established that the laws are one of the most punitive in the world. But they do two things. The first thing is they censor content. So some of the laws are designed in such a way that the state can, compel usually a media organization or company to remove content. So this has been, the most traditional and popular way. And of course, in taking down content, they may also punish journalists, individual journalists or media companies for publishing prohibited content. So prohibited under one-party law, for example. The type of content that are usually prohibited are quite subjective because they go beyond, sort of pornography. They specifically focus on political content, content that may be advocating for regime change. So as a result, the laws are defined to compel, usually media companies to take them. However, this approach is problematic because it's very, very tedious work. You need a lot of eyes, especially now that most of the media or all of the media is online. So it requires a lot of resources to police. And after you identify, a particular, source, you need to pursue it. You need to prosecute, punish, imprison, collect their fines, defend them, or prosecute them in court. So it's a long, drawn, and expensive effort. So now most regimes in the region are adopting another option, which is called shutdowns. So with shutdowns, they don't have to deal with individuals or companies. They can just shut down whole regions. Indonesian government does this quite often in Papua, where there's a lot of unrest and resistance to Indonesian rule. The Myanmar junta has used it in Rakhine State. So you can see that this this is quite popular. The Thai army has also used it in the Thai South, and and many countries are proposing internet gateways, such as Cambodia and also Thailand. Singapore has some kind of gateway, although it's not publicly discussed. So with one move, they can turn off the content. So in short, the laws have operate in two ways. They either remove content from the platform or they shut the whole platform down. Back to you.
As me coming from Myanmar has experienced internet shutdown in the regions, especially after the 2021 coup. Until now, the shutdowns are still continuing in the region with a lot of tensions. So as social media getting popular, one of the consequences coming through is dissemination of disinformation. So can you tell me what are the type of disinformation disseminated in the social media and what are their effects toward the media freedom?
Yeah. So when I was discussing content, whether it was to censor the content or shut down the platform or access to internet in the whole area, it usually has to do with a particular type of content. And the spin they put on it is that it is fake news or disinformation. So this would be the reason why they want to either censor or shut down, take a shutdown approach. But when we discuss disinformation, we have to be a lot more clear in the sense that there are 4 types of disinformation. The one is what we call everyday disinformation or scams, such as financial scam, romance scam, medical scam, and job scams. And then the second one would be around disinformation around identities, such as LGBTQI, refugee, gender, which generates hate. So such disinformation, creates social tensions. The third is what we call political disinformation. Here, this is disinformation during elections primarily, and also during times of political crisis, where groups, and governments use disinformation against each other. And finally is foreign interference. In Southeast Asia, another form of disinformation, largely is coming from China. There are big movements and studies, that are trying to document China's, disinformation role, and to a lesser extent, Russia. So there are these, 4 types of disinformation, and governments are generally interested in dealing with political disinformation because political disinformation is the one that threatens their rule in power. Sometimes it overlaps to, hate speech or identity disinformation and foreign interference. Most governments in Southeast Asia don't really touch because they're all kind of, don't want to upset China. But the evidence is there. So these are the types of disinformation that are currently circulating in the region.
So, can you give me situation of state-sponsored disinformation in the region?
Yeah. So when we talk about disinformation, it's often, especially when you talk about law, is always, positioned as disinformation created by individuals or small groups. But evidence is increasingly pointing to the fact that it's state agencies that are most heavily involved in disinformation, because the ordinary person or a small group just don't have the time, resources, or hate space to be engaging in disinformation in a large scale. So it's only states that are fully funded with large personnel and technology that can, engage in this kind of mass scale disinformation. Often this disinformation is channeled out by agencies in the military or secret services, but not directly, because the militaries may have their own teams working internally, and often they say they don't run negative campaigns, but only campaigns to promote the status quo or the entrenched elite. But when things get ugly, it's often very difficult to point the finger at the state because they usually use proxies. So this is an area that requires, a lot of investigation, and also there's a need for the tech companies to cooperate. So I think this would be the next area to watch, the rise of state-sponsored disinformation, and then trying to identify, who is doing what and where did they get the money and support to do those things on a full-time basis. Okay, back to you.
So let's dive into the persecution of journalists in the region. As stated in the report, there are a lot of persecution toward journalists, especially female journalists in the region of Southeast Asia. So how the legislation persecute the journalists?
Right. Well, journalists are a large target simply because they are content generators, and especially if they're critical journalists or working for independent outlets, then they tend to be the ones getting the brunt of it. So why do we, see more number of women, increasingly in the line of fire, female journalists in particular? You will have to go back to the demographics, and you have to look at enrollment numbers and the demography of the enrollment in sort of media schools. Women make up the largest entrance to many of the media and communication programs. As a result, you have a disproportionate number of female journalists joining the industry. Now, whether it's a formal industry or informal industry, in terms of, working independently as a freelancer, influencer, or even for small independent outlets. Now, because they also report critically, largely on politics, then they become the target. So in a place like Cambodia, the number of female journalists is high, but at the same time, they are also in the line of fire by statements and attacks made by much older men who are from the conservative political ruling class. Back to you.
How can we combat the disinformation, persecution of journalists, and persecution toward freedom of expression, which is considered as human rights abuse?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, dealing with these issues and then how do we deal with it. So in terms of disinformation broadly, including state-sponsored disinformation, we need to look at things like fact-checking, media literacy, training to improve the quality of journalism, and these are the normal and popular methods that are out there in the market and being promoted and supported by many stakeholders. But the other approach is really about coalition building. I think there needs to be a bit of a pushback and a call out against such measures against journalists. And I think it's important to have both, national networks as well as regional networks to lobby. I always say this, but when we make such formations, it must be values-based. You need to bring people who share the same outlook and mindset in order to cooperate, because there are too many people whose motivations and reasons for joining such groups are very different. So civil society is not a place for tourism, right? It is serious stuff. It requires dedication, it requires sacrifice, it requires passion. It is not a job to earn a wage. You have some elements of it, of course, for sustenance, but there must be something else that drives you to that goal, right? Now, if national groups and regional coalitions are made up of people driven by that goal, it's a lot more powerful. So back to you.
So when we talk about disinformation, one thing came into our mind is hate speech. Also in Myanmar, back in Rohingya genocide time and back in the 2012 communal conflict, hate speech played a huge role in the bloodbath. So how hate speech play the role in the disinformation?
Well, hate speech is a product of disinformation. So you say, false things about someone's identity in order to garner or mobilize, thoughts, opinions, and sometimes physical action against the other, right? And that's what happened in the Myanmar case. You had the Burma Buddhist majority led by radical monks who are articulating hate against the Muslims, but in particular the Rohingya community, drawing in issues of, citizenship and all of that, interrelated matters. So as a result, there was actually the Mabata movement was able to mobilize people against the Muslims and the Rohingyas, and also was able to threaten and use foul language against UN representatives during that period. So we need to recognize that this is being used as a weapon, because it can create harm, mental to physical harm, but also as a tool of mobilization. So here, I think the issue really is about the tech companies. I think there has to be stronger lobbies, constant articulation, because it's the algorithms that drive hate. Because, the algorithm is such that people, get drawn to these things. So the algorithms are set up to promote these things and spread these things online. And that's why it picks up. So the debate now is, how do we hold tech companies accountable, and what can they do? And how much effort and resources they can put to police their own platforms. So back to you.
So how can we combat against hate speech? In some of the state, the state persecuted toward anti-hate speech campaigner. So how can we combat toward the hate speech in this situation?
No, I think first, I think the biggest thing is really, once again, to lobby and lean on the tech companies because they are the owners of the platform and they have the software, the algorithms to kind of deal with it at that level, and also resources and manpower to deal with it that way. The other would really be public education, to ensure that people understand it's not a very nice thing to do. So you need to have, to build tolerance, have social integration, socialization activities, targeted throughout the whole community, including the very young. Yeah.
Here comes the end of our discussion for today. Thank you for having with us, Dr. James.
Yeah, good to be here. And for the listeners of the podcast, once again, we'll recommend Asia Center's report on media freedoms in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.